welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into topics that might seem complex, maybe jargon-filled at first, but they have a really profound impact on your world. And today, we're dissecting a big one, Bitcoin mining, and it's truly astonishing appetite for electricity. We've got a stack of sources here for this deep dive, including some pretty eye-opening bits from a chapter called The Electricity Vampire, which tells you something right there. Our mission, cut through the hype, the polished story the Bitcoin industry often tells, and get to the reality. We want to pull out those key nuggets, give you those aha moments. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely clued in. You know, you hear figures like MicroStrategy's Michael Saylor, a huge Bitcoin proponent, famously calling mining the most efficient, cleanest industrial use of electricity.
Yeah.
But what our sources suggest is that this story, it's more like a sophisticated sleight of hand. A delusion, maybe? Designed to distract. Yeah, and just to give you a sense of scale right off the bat, this network, and this is conservative, uses more electricity than the entire nation of Argentina.
That's a G20 economy, 45 million people.
Exactly. Just let that sink in. So yeah, we're about to unpack let's call it the dirty, inconvenient, and maybe even dangerous truth behind all the promises.
That's a staggering figure to start with. So let's dig into this. How can a digital currency, something that feels so abstract, use so much physical electricity? What's actually going on?
Well, it's fascinating because the immense energy use isn't really an accident. It's baked into the design. Bitcoin uses something called proof of work to secure itself. You can think of it like a giant global lottery, basically. Thousands upon thousands of specialized computers all over the world are just burning energy 24/7. They're racing to solve these, honestly, pointless computational puzzles. And here's the kicker. Only one computer wins the prize for each block. All the energy burned by all the losers, just wasted heat. This intentional inefficiency is what drives that massive energy footprint.
Intentional inefficiency, that's quite a concept.
It really is. And the scale, as you said, is staggering. We're talking annual estimates between, say, 120 and 160 terawatt hours, TWH.
Okay, terawatt hours, put that in context for us again. Right, so 160 TWH, that's roughly Argentina, like we mentioned, 45 million people. Even the lower end, 120 TWH, that's comparable to the entire state of Washington here in the U.S., or a country like Sweden. Globally, it's huge. It accounts for somewhere between 0.2% and nearly 0.9% of all electricity consumed on the entire planet for this one network.
Wow. Nearly 1% of global electricity, potentially. Okay, let's bring that down even further. What of just one transaction? If I send some Bitcoin, what does that cost energy-wise? What does it mean in, like, everyday terms?
Okay, so a single Bitcoin transaction. The estimates hover around 1,200 kilowatt hours.
1,200 kilowatt hours. What does that actually do?
Well, think about it this way. That's enough energy to power an average American home for over a month.
A month?
Yeah. Or if you like coffee, it could brew maybe 100,000 pots.
Good grief.
Or think electric cars. It's enough juice to drive an EV from New York City to San Francisco and back again for one transaction. It's almost hard to believe, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
So how does that compare to, say, Visa? You know, the system we all use constantly, handling billions more transactions. Is that even a fair fight?
It's not even in the same league. It's a completely different category. The energy used for that one Bitcoin transaction, it could power nearly 100,000 transactions on Visa's network, maybe even more.
100,000?
Yeah. Visa uses, centralized data centers. They're highly optimized for efficiency. Bitcoin, because of proof of work, relies on this massive, distributed, deliberately redundant competition. Thousands burning energy for one winner. It's just fundamentally different. So yeah, comparing them on energy isn't really apples to apples. It's more like apples to, power plants.
Okay, so given this colossal energy use, numbers like entire nations, how on earth does the industry sell itself as green or environmentally friendly? It feels like a massive contradiction.
Well, that's where the PR machine gets really interesting and, frankly, sophisticated. They've pivoted. They talk about environmental stewardship, even claim they're helping the green transition. But then you look at independent analyses like there was a UN university study in 2023. It paints a very, very different picture. It found the network is overwhelmingly powered by fossil fuels, coal, 45%, natural gas, 21%.
Okay, so that's what here.
67%, two-thirds, right there, coal and gas.
Wow.
Clean renewables like actual solar and wind, less than 10%. Hydropower adds another 16%. But a lot of that has its own issues or is from existing large dams. These just aren't the numbers of a clean industry.
So if that's the reality, how do they get to those numbers you sometimes hear, like 50% sustainable or even higher? What's going on with the accounting there? What jumps out at you?
Yeah, the language is key. Notice they often shift from renewable energy, which usually means wind, solar, geothermal, to the much broader term sustainable energy mix.
Oh.
That lets them lump in nuclear power. And importantly, existing, often decades-old hydroelectric dams, it makes the percentage look better. And crucially, it kind of papers over a big shift that happened. After China cracked down on mining in 2021, a lot of miners moved. They left places that had, some access to seasonal hydropower and moved to places like Kazakhstan, which is heavy on coal, or Texas, Georgia, Kentucky in the U.S., which rely a lot on natural gas and coal.
So the geographic shift actually made the fuel mix dirtier.
In many cases, yes, or at least locked in more fossil fuel dependency. And then there's this narrative they push about using stranded or curtailed energy like power that would supposedly be wasted anyway.
Right, I've heard that one.
But in practice, what these huge mining operations often do is create a brand new, constant, profitable demand for existing fossil fuel plants. Instead of helping retire them, it gives them a lifeline. It can actually discourage retirement and pull investment away from genuine renewables towards just feeding the miners.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Bitcoin's whole, its a core idea, right, is decentralization. No single boss, no government control. But does that actually hold up when you look at the physical stuff needed to run it, the hardware?
That's a really critical point, and it undermines the decentralization narrative significantly. Because even though mining happens globally, the manufacturing of the essential hardware, that's incredibly centralized. We're talking about ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. These are the super specialized, power-hungry chips you absolutely need for Bitcoin mining, and the market for those, it's dominated by just 3 companies, all based in China: Bitmain, MicroBT, and Canaan.
3 companies.
Yeah. Together, estimates suggest they control something like 90% of the entire global market for these machines. That's an oligopoly, not a decentralized ecosystem.
So even if you have big mining farms setting up in, say, Texas, those American companies are still buying almost all their gear from these few Chinese firms.
Exactly. Companies like Riot Platforms or Marathon Digital, even though they're huge U.S.-based operators, they're almost completely dependent on that supply chain. They're basically tenants, renting the essential equipment from a handful of manufacturers elsewhere. Even Intel, the huge American chip maker, tried to get into this game with their own mining chip. Remember Bonanza Mine?
Vaguely, yeah.
Well, they quietly shut that project down. They just couldn't compete on efficiency or price with the established Chinese players. And this hardware concentration is then amplified by mining pools. These are groups miners join to smooth out their income. Many of the biggest pools have links back to those same hardware manufacturers, concentrating control even further.
So the pools add another layer of centralization.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it creates this weird situation after the China mining ban in 2021. China cracked down on running mines domestically, but kept its grip on making the machines. So effectively, China shifted from being the world's main mining host to being its main mining landlord. It gives them this huge, non-obvious lever of influence over the whole global network. It's like a strategic dependency hiding in plain sight.
A strategic dependency hiding in plain sight.
Okay.
That's a really striking way to put it. Okay, let's circle back to Michael Saylor then. His claim. Most efficient, cleanest industrial use of electricity. How does that stack up against everything we've just laid out?
Well, the cleanest part, as we saw, just doesn't hold water based on independent analysis. Overwhelmingly fossil fuels, huge carbon footprint, 55 to 65 million metric tons of CO2 a year, like a whole developed country. You just can't credibly call that clean.
Right.
The most efficient claim is even more tricky. It's cleverly misleading. Saylor often points to the machine efficiency joules per terahash, how much energy a single ASIC uses to perform calculations. And yes, new machines are more efficient than old ones.
Okay, so the individual machines get better.
Right. But here's the crucial part. That improvement is completely irrelevant at the network level because of Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment. Remember that mechanism. Every 2 weeks or so, the network automatically makes the puzzles harder or easier to solve, aiming for a new block every 10 minutes, no matter how much computing power is thrown at it.
Okay, so
if miners suddenly get machines that are twice as efficient, they don't just use half the energy. No. The difficulty adjusts upwards to compensate for the increased hashing power. All that happens is that miners are incentivized to buy more of the new efficient machines to compete at the higher difficulty level. Individual machine efficiency goes up, but total network energy consumption also goes up to meet the new difficulty.
Wait, so better efficiency actually makes the total energy use go up? That seems completely backwards.
It is. It's a perverse incentive baked right into the core protocol. More efficient machines just fuel the arms race and drive total energy consumption higher. It creates this dangerous feedback loop. We saw it clearly, like a 400% jump in Bitcoin's price led to a 140% surge in its energy use because higher prices make mining more profitable, attracting more miners, driving up difficulty, driving up energy use. So yeah, a bull market for Bitcoin's price is almost by definition a bear market for the climate.
That's a sobering thought.
And just quickly on the data they use, Saylor often cites the Bitcoin Mining Council, the BMC. You need to know the BMC isn't an independent research body. It's a lobbying group founded by Saylor himself and others in the industry. Their data is self-reported by miners. It's not independently verified. It's known to use methodologies that make the renewable share look higher than it likely is. Our sources basically call it the modern equivalent of the tobacco industry funding its own research. You just have to take it with a massive grain of salt.
Okay, that's crucial context. Now, beyond the huge numbers, the terawatts, the CO2 tons, what about the tangible, on-the-ground harms? What does this industry actually do to communities and local environments? It can't just be about the electricity bill, right?
No, absolutely not. The impacts are very real and often fall on communities that didn't ask for this. One major one is electronic waste, e-waste. Because of that hardware arms race we talked about, the need to constantly upgrade ASICs to stay profitable, these expensive machines have incredibly short lifespans.
Sure.
Estimates range from just 1.3 years to maybe 2.5 years on average. They become economically obsolete, unprofitable, long before they actually stop working physically.
Yeah, just get tossed.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
One study estimated the Bitcoin network generates over 30,000 metric tons of e-waste every year.
30,000 tons.
Yeah, which is comparable to the entire small IT e-waste stream of a country like the Netherlands. And if you break it down per transaction, that same study calculated that each Bitcoin transaction leaves behind over half a pound of toxic e-waste stuff containing lead, mercury, other hazardous materials. And again, this isn't seen as a flaw to be fixed. One source called it a feature, not a bug, of the economic model driving constant consumption.
Half a pound of toxic waste per transaction.
Yeah.
Plus the month of electricity. That's
Yeah, but okay. What else? What about the direct impact on people living near these facilities? What are communities actually dealing with?
Noise. The sonic blight is a huge, huge issue. These aren't like your typical quiet data centers. They're industrial scale operations. Imagine warehouses packed wall to wall with thousands of these ASIC miners, each with high-speed fans, plus massive industrial fans for cooling the building, all running 24/7.
Incredibly loud. Residents living near these facilities, especially in rural areas where they often set up, describe it as a constant, inescapable roar or high-pitched whine, like living next to an airport runway or, as one resident put it, 1,000 leaf blowers that never turn off.
Oh my God.
Noise readings taken near these sites consistently measure levels over 85 decibels. That's the level known to cause permanent hearing damage with prolonged exposure. People report devastating health impacts: tinnitus, vertigo, severe migraines, chronic sleep deprivation because the noise just never stops. It penetrates walls.
Are people fighting back?
Yeah, there are lawsuits. Like in Hood County, Texas, residents sued Marathon Digital over a facility there, describing this constant high-pitched whining and shrieking noise that ruin their quality of life. The industry often targets these rural areas precisely because they have weaker zoning laws and less local power to resist. And beyond noise and waste, you also have issues like strain on local water resources because some of these facilities use water for cooling. And perhaps most ironically, the phenomenon of zombie power plants.
Zombie power plants.
Yeah, old, previously closed down fossil fuel power plants, mostly coal or gas, that are brought back online specifically just to provide the huge amounts of cheap power these miners need. So instead of retiring polluting infrastructure, Bitcoin mining is literally reviving it.
Reviving dirty power plants.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. So, putting this all together, is this necessary? Is all this energy drain, this e-waste, the noise, the community harm, is it just the unavoidable cost of having a digital currency like Bitcoin? Or is there another way?
This is maybe the most frustrating part of the whole story, because the answer is unequivocally no, it is not necessary. This entire crisis is, as one source put it, entirely demonstrably unnecessary. The solution exists, it's proven, it's widely used, it's called proof of stake, or POS.
Proof of stake.
Yeah.
How does that work differently?
Instead of securing the network by burning massive amounts of computational energy, like proof of work, proof of stake secures it using an economic stake. Participants, called validators, lock up their own capital, their own coins, as collateral. If they try to cheat the system or validate fraudulent transactions, their staked capital gets slashed, meaning they lose it. So it replaces security through wasted energy with security through economic incentive and risk. You behave honestly or you lose your money. And the key thing, it uses vastly, vastly less energy.
Okay, conceptually that makes sense. But has it actually been done? Can you really switch a major blockchain from that energy-hungry proof of work to this proof of stake system? Is there a real-world example?
Yes, and it's a huge one. Ethereum.
Ah, right. The second biggest crypto.
Exactly. In September 2022, Ethereum went through a massive upgrade called the Merge. They successfully transitioned their entire network from proof of work to proof of stake.
And what happened to their energy use?
It plummeted instantly by over 99.95%.
99.95%.
Yes. Overnight, Ethereum went from having an energy footprint comparable to a country like Finland down to something like a small town or even just a few large office buildings. It was arguably the single largest, fastest decarbonization event of any major industry ever, just flicking a switch, basically, by changing the consensus mechanism. And many other modern blockchains or scaling solutions built on top of blockchains use POS or similar efficient methods from the start, achieving energy savings of like 100,000 times or more compared to Bitcoin.
Okay, so if Ethereum did it, if the tech exists and it cuts energy use by 99.95%, why hasn't Bitcoin done it? Why does it stick with this incredibly inefficient proof of work? Is it technically harder for Bitcoin, or is it something else?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, according to our sources, is not really technical. While it would be complex, it's seen as feasible. The resistance is primarily ideological.
Ideological.
Yes. It's described as a rigid, quasi-religious dogma among Bitcoin's core developers and most vocal proponents, often called maximalists. For them, proof of work isn't just a mechanism, it's sacred. It provides what they call thermodynamic security, this idea that security is rooted in real-world energy expenditure. Any change away from POW is seen as heresy, as fundamentally altering Bitcoin's soul, destroying its core value proposition of immutability.
So it's like a fundamental belief system that prevents change.
Pretty much. This rigid belief in POW has become, ironically, maybe the network's biggest liability in the face of the climate crisis. But ideology isn't the only factor, let's be real. There's also a massive financial incentive structure built around proof of work.
Ah, follow the money.
Exactly. You've got a multi-billion-dollar industry. The ASIC manufacturers we talked about, the large-scale mining farm operators, even some energy companies profiting from selling power to miners. A switch to proof of stake would basically render their entire business model and billions of dollars worth of specialized hardware instantly obsolete. So they have a very strong vested interest in maintaining the status quo, regardless of the environmental cost.
Right. Ideology provides the cover story, but money keeps the engine running. Okay. Let's tackle some specific defenses you hear from the industry then. They push back hard on these criticisms. What about the claim that Bitcoin mining stabilizes the grid? Does it?
This is a common one, and it's clever spin.
Yeah.
Some miners participate in demand response programs where they agree to power down during peak energy demand, and they get paid for it.
So they do help sometimes.
Well, framing it as stabilizing is misleading. First, they create the instability, or at least worsen it, by adding these huge, constant, inflexible loads onto grids, especially weaker rural grids. Then, they profit by offering to temporarily reduce the problem they introduced. It's more of a risk mitigation strategy for their own business, avoiding grid collapse or sky-high prices that they market as a public service. And often, the payments they receive for curtailing come from higher bills for regular ratepayers.
So they add demand, stress the grid, then get paid to reduce their stress slightly.
Essentially, yeah. It's not really a net benefit for grid stability overall compared to not having that massive load there in the first place.
Okay, another one. They argue that proof of stake isn't fair, that it creates oligarchies of wealth, where the rich just get richer, implying proof of work is more democratic. What's the counter to that?
That argument completely ignores the reality of proof of work today. POW has already created a massive oligarchy, but it's an oligarchy of capital-intensive infrastructure. To meaningfully compete in Bitcoin mining now, you need millions, tens of millions of dollars for a data center, bulk deals on ASICs from that concentrated supply chain, and access to huge amounts of cheap power. It is absolutely not democratic or accessible to the average person anymore. It's an industrial-scale operation dominated by big capital.
Right, the barrier to entry is huge.
Exactly. Whereas proof-of-stake systems, while they do reward those who stake more, are generally more accessible. The barrier to entry for becoming a validator, or even just delegating your stake to a validator, is often much, much lower than setting up a competitive POW mining farm. And the rules are usually transparent and enforced on-chain. The POW oligarchy is arguably far more entrenched and opaque.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's the simple comparison. Hey, any system uses energy. Even Visa uses energy. Is that a fair point?
It's true that everything uses energy, but it's the scale that makes the comparison absurd. It's a false equivalence. Like we discussed, Visa processes maybe 200 billion transactions a year. Bitcoin processes around 100 million. Yet, Bitcoin uses potentially hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of times more energy per
A
transaction.
million to one gap, potentially?
Something in that ballpark, yes. It's not even close. Plus, Visa and the banking system provide a huge range of other services: fraud protection, chargebacks, loans, accounts, customer support that Bitcoin just doesn't. Comparing their energy use is like saying, well, a bicycle uses energy and a freight train uses energy. Yeah, true, but they do vastly different things at completely incomparable scales of resource consumption.
Got it. And finally, the really optimistic one. Bitcoin will incentivize renewable energy. The idea that miners seeking cheap power will drive investment in new wind and solar. Is that happening?
This is mostly wishful thinking, unfortunately. Miners aren't primarily seeking renewable power. They're seeking the cheapest power, period. And globally, the cheapest, most readily available baseload power is still often fossil fuels, especially coal and natural gas.
So they go where the power is cheap, regardless of the source.
Largely, yes. The examples of miners co-locating with new renewable projects are still relatively rare exceptions, often heavily promoted for PR. And even when they do use renewables, there's an opportunity cost. That clean energy could have been used to power homes, hospitals, schools, electrify transportation things with arguably much higher social value. Instead, it's being diverted to secure speculative digital assets. In many cases, rather than driving new renewables, Bitcoin mining actually props up old fossil fuel plants or distorts the energy market in ways that delay the green transition for everyone else.
So it can actually hinder the transition.
It absolutely can, by creating artificial demand for power sources that should be phasing out, or by consuming clean power that's needed elsewhere. So yeah, you really have to see these defenses for what they often are, rhetorical firewalls. They're designed to deflect criticism using misleading comparisons and often industry-funded data, rather than addressing the fundamental inefficiency and environmental cost head-on. Bitcoin chooses its energy consumption model.
Right. It's a choice, not an inevitability.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, we've really journeyed from that polished story of clean, efficient innovation to a much starker reality, haven't we? A reality of colossal energy use, significant environmental fallout, and questionable decentralization.
Exactly. And the key takeaway, I think, is that Bitcoin's massive energy problem isn't some unsolvable technical challenge. The solutions, like proof of stake, are known, proven, and dramatically more efficient. Ethereum's successful merge demonstrated that conclusively. Bitcoin's refusal to adopt these solutions isn't about technical impossibility. It's about ideology, it's about inertia, and it's about protecting the vested financial interests tied to the wasteful proof-of-work status quo. In today's world, facing climate change, it's not just unsustainable, you could argue it's genuinely indefensible.
Indefensible. That's a strong word. It really leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? What does it actually mean for innovation, for real progress, when a technology seems to prioritize its own rigid dogma and the profits of a specific group over pragmatic solutions and the broader well-being of communities and the planet? Especially now, with the energy and climate challenges we all face. Something to really reflect on. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.